Today I'm joined by Sean Hooker, who is the boss man of the Property Redress Scheme. In the UK, if you're an estate agent, letting agent or property manager, you have to be part of a government-sanctioned redress scheme, one of which is Sean's, called the PRS, the Property Redress Scheme, and also the other one is called the Property Ombudsman. I think what I'd like to do today, Sean, is I've got a series of questions that people have contacted me with because they knew you were coming on today, and also I've done my own homework as well. And I think before I'd like to kick off is, why is there two and not just one?
Chris, well, there's a long story behind that. Well, essentially, the Property Ombudsman set itself up 25 odd years ago as a voluntary organisation. They had affiliations with Property Mark, which was then whatever it was it Arla, I think, at the time, and NAEA. What happened was that there wasn't a redress provision, compulsory provision for letting agents. There was for estate agents under the Estate Agency Act, but not for letting agents. So there was a gap, and that gap was those agents that didn't voluntarily join as a letting agent. Even if they'd been an estate agent, they wouldn't join as a letting agent. So the government approached us as a provider of tenancy deposit protection. So I'm part of a bigger group, Hamilton Fraser Group. We were running one of the tenancy deposit.
And there's three of those, isn't there?
And there's three of those.
Yes.
And that was because the government didn't want to put all their eggs in one basket for that. So they came and said, well, we'd be interested in providing a provision. I presume they went to the other two schemes as well. Because what you deal is with complaints. So I know, you hear ombudsman or redress and everyone goes, what the hell's that? It's basically handling complaints. So they came to us and we tendered for that. Property Mark at the time were affiliated to the Property Ombudsman, and we had no affiliation. Property Mark, the Ombudsman had a code of practice. I think you're going to come on to that. We didn't. But we felt that there was a gap in the market, and that gap in the market were those agents that were starting up, or the ones that were small and didn't feel that they had the capacity to join an organisation like Property Mark. So we came into the market, and within the first year, we picked up 5,000 members.
Is that firms or members? Is that the same thing?
Firms, yes. So it'd be firms and branches. So that's how we count.
So how many do you have now then?
So we have 20,000 odd. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So of that, it's about 18,000 are individual firms, and then there's about another 1,500 odd branches that are associated with those. And we're growing. We're continually growing.
So would it be fair to say that if a letting or an estate agent wanted to set up tomorrow, legally they have to be part of a redress scheme? They could either be with you, which is the Property Redress Scheme, or the Property Ombudsman. I've come up with a few thoughts on the differences between the two, but well, I'll tell you what, let me share with you what my thoughts are, and then you can counteract if you disagree. How does that sound?
100%, 100%.
Right, so the Property Ombudsman has been long established and independent, but it has to be, for estate agents, letting agents and property professionals, and it provides alternative dispute resolution between consumers and agents, and they must follow the TPO, the Property Ombudsman Code of Practice, which is not just about redress but just being a good agent, which sets out obligations around fair treatment, transparency and professionalism. And if a complaint is upheld, the Ombudsman can order compensation, this is for the TPO, of up to 25,000. Membership is mandatory for letting agents in England as per the Enterprise and Regulation Reform Act. That is membership to a redress scheme, not to the TPO. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct, yes. So we're both covered under exactly the same legislation.
Whilst your firm is a little bit newer and it's more, as I said, more recent, and again, often seen as less stringent than the TPO, not criticising the TPO, but just generally that's what the feeling is. And a little bit more again, I'm just repeating what others have said, a little bit more business savvy, and I'm just more of aware of the letting agent's point of view as well, just the complainants. You don't have a formal code of practice, but still must meet legal and ethical standards. You too can also award compensation up to 25,000, and as I said, decisions are often seen more as commercially pragmatic rather than strict enforcement. So a little bit of grey area there as opposed to pure black and white. And some agents prefer your scheme, the PRS, the Property Redress Scheme, because it's perceived as being more flexible and has lower fees. Is that a fair comparison?
I think it's a fair comparison, and but the devil's in the detail, as with all of these things. Essentially, the code of practice which the TPO built is something which I admire. But when we came in, we thought, well, actually, do we replicate that? Do we come into an industry where there are already lots of rules and regulations and lots of codes, and add another interpretation of that? Or do we say that we can look holistically across the whole of the industry and all the codes and all the laws and all the regulations? So there is a letting, a letting agent guides from RICS, for example. We can refer to the TPO's code, and we do so on many occasions, especially on the estate agency side. But we didn't believe having our own code per se would help.
No point in repeating yourself.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So I've got 7-ish topics that I want to plough through, and I would like your personal point of view, and also the PRS's point of view as well. They're probably the same thing. And the first section I want to talk about is fairness and bias. Okay. How do you respond to claims that redress schemes themselves, both of you together, unfairly favour tenants and landlords over letting agents? And what mechanisms are in place to ensure that agents get a fair hearing?
That's a very good question. But one thing I'm going to point out to you that we have a service complaints process that if you are unhappy, you can come and complain about us specifically, not necessarily about the complaint. And we get equal number of tenants saying that we are biased because the agents pay us, and agents say that we're biased towards tenants. So I think on that, you can conclude that if the decision has not quite gone the way that you wanted it to go, you might feel that it's gone in favour of one of the other parties.
Is there a direct link that if the more people that lose probably are more likely to complain then?
Correct. Yeah.
I think you've tracked that, have you?
We've tracked that, yes, and it is quite established principle within redress and ombudsman that people that have not got the result they want are the ones most likely to believe the system doesn't work.
I used to work in banking, and I had my bank accounts needed to be checked, and we had a joke by saying, "Who's checking the checkers?"
That's a very good question as well.
So who's checking the checkers at your place then?
Right. So this is how we have approached it, and to be fair, we've looked at other practices like the Financial Services Ombudsman and other complaint services in making this as fair as possible. And what we have moved down the road of, and we can touch on it a bit later in more detail, is more of early resolution. So what's hardwired into the process can be improved, and we can deal with some of that, is that the first port of call is that nobody can come to us directly until they've gone to the agent and allowed that agent a fair due process to deal with that complaint. So you should have a complaint process. You should take the full opportunity to deal with that as best as you can, and not to get it to come to the ombudsman. But when it does come to the ombudsman or the redress scheme, what we do is we have another engagement of early resolution, because when you are in a dispute, you take a position. Well, each party takes a position, and sometimes that's entrenchable. Now, so however hard that each party tries, they can't bridge that, and they might need a bit of help. So we try and do mediation and what I call facilitated negotiation. So that is, have you properly negotiated? Yes, we have, of course we have. can we see if we can help? And that has actually been so successful. And we've just had our annual report out, and the statistics are now showing that over 50% of our cases are resolved that way.
So you don't even get to the point where you as the, I would say it's the ombudsman, that's the other lot, sorry. But when when the person who's looking at the documentation, instead of saying, right, let's grill both of you, you say, right, come on, let's put you together.
Correct.
A bit like they do in the courts.
A little bit, yeah. It's a lot like that. And you know, we went away, and I spoke to several people in the industry of what actually could work. And of course, we had what I called my sausage machine when we first set up. Whenever you set up any of these processes, you know, it's a nice kind of stage of, you know, go from station to station as the train shuttles along. But what you find on that is that, you know, when you've got a long train line, people want to get to the end destination. They're not so focused on the intermediate sections. And I said, look, let's reverse that. Let's get them to understand that this process is going to take longer and cost more if you don't use the opportunities at the early stage to get those resolutions. And when you get the early resolution, it is a more...
You don't put the landlord and tenant in, the agent and the tenant in the same room, do you?
No, there's no head bashing. I mean, there are methods of alternative dispute resolution when you have people over the table, but you know, good mediation is, I talk to you, it's in confidence, I find out what your concerns are, I find out what you want, I then ask you what would you be prepared to offer the other party, I then do the same process, and it's a ping pong, an exchange of getting you to a resolution that you both can live with. You may not be 100% happy, but you can both live with. You don't sign your papers, it's your decision. I've not imposed it. Now, of course, if after that there is an impasse, it then goes on to one of our adjudicators, and one of our adjudicators will ask you for evidence, gather that evidence. It's evidence-based, so it's on the balance of probabilities. It's on you convincing that adjudicator that your version of the truth is the most likely to be correct, and you have the evidence to support that.
Let's move on to the adjudicators. What property industry do your what experience do your adjudicators have? Should they have required to have been letting agents before they started?
We have quite a wide range, actually. So when we first started up, we said to all, well, there were qualifications out there that you can get. So CEDA, for example.
What does that mean?
So CEDA is a Centre of Effective Dispute Resolution. And I'm a qualified mediator through that. And there's another organisation called the Institute of Arbitrators. So we said at the beginning, you need one of those qualifications. But the more we looked at it, an effective negotiator or effective mediator doesn't necessarily have to have letters after their names.
And there's no legal requirement for that.
And there's no legal requirement. So we have a mixture of people who've had legal training and people who've worked in the industry. And I would say that the people who have had the legal training are probably make better adjudicators, and the people who have had industry training probably make better mediators. That's a generalisation, and if my staff are watching this, I'm not making any judgments on any of that. I just think that does make a lot of sense. Somebody that can talk your language from an industry sector is better trying to get an early resolution. But when it comes to a formal decision, you know, somebody that's used to looking at evidence and going through that process equally can, is a valuable.
Would you therefore put your ones with experience in the early stages?
Yeah, as I said, I love my football, by the way. We won't go into too much of that, but I always, I always use the analogy of a penalty shootout. You put your best players forward for the first penalties. The earlier you get the best people in place dealing with that.
So just to confirm, I mean, isn't that going to muddy the waters on whether it's fair or not, because you're putting a letting agent in on the mediation?
No, these are people that have had experience in that sector, and they may not necessarily be letting agents. We have some who have been letting agents and people who work in property management, but they understand.
Who's making sure they're doing a good job?
Well, the process makes sure, because what happens is that you empower the parties to make that decision whether they accept
And of course, if the parties don't agree,
Then it goes to the adjudicator.
it goes to the more formal stage anyway.
Yeah, okay. And then at the top of that, if at the end of the day you've had an adjudicator make a decision and they believe that that decision is flawed in either fact, so that fact can be that the adjudicator's not taken into consideration a material fact that would have changed it. It might be that that material fact wasn't quite teased out in the process and comes to light, and that changes it. A fact in law, so if there's been something where you've literally gone against the law of the land, or administration, and it does happen, you can miss bits of paper, you can do that. Then there's an appeal process, or we call it a review process. That review process is looked at whether it's valid under those criteria, and then I literally sit down and do the final decisions. So I actually have a caseload and I deal with those ones that have gone right through the process.
And can you assure the letting agents watching this that your adjudicators reflect on real world challenges? Someone said, someone contacted me, how do you ensure that your adjudicators are truly understands the pressures and constraints agents face?
Well, part of that is the agent's communication with us. One of the things that
what do you wish they would do more? And again, well, let's give it fair. Let's talk about the agents. What do you wish agents who get involved with the redress scheme did more of and less of? And we'll come to tenants in a second.
100%. So what I would like to see agents do more of is two things. Number one, documentation. So make sure that everything that they do as a professional is documented and supported so that you have a clear timeline and record of what's happened, because then that's not in dispute. You've got to say, well, look, we've done this record here.
And there's technology now that can listen in on all your calls.
Correct, yeah.
And actually transcribe it. Yeah.
And the other one is communication. And that is actually picking up the telephone and trying to deal with the issues before they become issues. And that communication is 100%.
Okay, so more documentation and
more communication.
Yeah. What should they do less of?
Less of is get on a high horse and say, oh, the person's a troublemaker and we're going to disregard it. Don't always take a complaint seriously. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we're going to touch on things like serial complainants, which do happen, but most complainants do have some form of genuine grievance.
They just want to be listened to, don't they?
They want to be listened to. And you may have your position and you may say, well, actually, they're technically wrong, but you need to communicate with them and you need to not disregard them.
Tenants, what would you hope they did more of and less of?
Understand that when they're entering into a contract with a landlord or a letting agent, that it is a legal process, and absolutely, your priority as a tenant moving into property is to get hold of the keys and to move into a home. But make sure that you have checked and understand your obligations and their obligations, so that there's no ambiguity between what you need to do that. So the government, for example, have a how to let guide, which has to legally be handed out to all tenants. I
read it.
I don't think many read it, even though it's not the most complicated document, but they should really enter in and read, not the small print, because, read what their obligations are and what the obligations for the landlord is.
And what do you hope they do less of?
Disregard things, and ignore things and not deal with them earlier. So I see a lot of what tenants do is they get very, very frustrated. They bury their heads in the sand, and then the next thing you hear is that they've decided not to pay the rent because they're so angry with the landlord. And then you've got the difficult conversation of saying that actually you can't do that by law. We can help you, but if you stop paying the rent, then you've kind of dug yourself into made it worse. Oh. So, but remember, we also have complaints against landlords against the agents as well, and it's almost again equal. So landlords are complaining about the service that agents are giving, and that's again equally something that landlords, they just get an agent and they think the agent's God and is going to do everything for them. They don't understand it's another legal obligation, and that even though you have empowered them to do work on your behalf, you've got to have some kind of interest in checking on it.
Let's move on and look at some agents have come back to me and talked about the inconsistency and lack of transparency. One agent said he has heard reports that similar cases have received different outcomes. How do you ensure consistency throughout the decision-making process?
Well, rightly so. This is not a tick box exercise. It's not a formula, maybe some boffins out there may think there's a big AI solution for doing all of this, and a magic solution will give you consistent results every single time. Every case is different. Every case is variable. So the way you have to look at it, just as a judge would look at it, is look at the cases that you've dealt with before. You compare that to the detriment and to the individual, and to we have a guide to award. So I think people's expectations of what they can get in terms of compensation are much higher than they actually are entitled to. So we clearly lay that out, and a document is sent out to look at before you actually do that and manage your expectations. And we monitor and audit every single one of our staff on a monthly and regular basis. And that will be looking at not just the awards, but the quality of any written correspondence that goes out. Because sometimes, if we haven't clearly explained, you can look and say, well, actually, I don't understand that. So we try and get it very simply explained, outlined, and so that there's no ambiguity of why we've made that decision. You may not agree with it, but at least you will have that reasoning that you can look back and say, oh yeah, I can see the logic. I don't agree with it, but I can see the logic.
I mean, I've heard some absolutely shocking stories of letting agents really doing bad things, and they got a slap on the wrist that probably of a fine that probably costs £500-600. And you think to yourself, well, that sounds, surely you'd have been fined more than that. I mean, what is your average award?
Right, so our average award is I think it's about £700 odd at the moment. Yeah. Okay. So and of course that's across all the disciplines. So we have lettings, we have sales, we have property management. So some of them are higher than others. Now you make a very good point, Chris, because we are not a regulator. Neither ourselves or the TPO are regulators. We are basically complaint handling services, okay, with a little bit of extra.
Yeah.
So a lot of the case time we get when the complainant comes to us, we can only deal with part of that complaint. And that will be, say, the service element of it or the communication element of it. There will, however, be other areas where there are far more serious things going on. Now, we have memorandums of understanding between ourselves and the TPO, but also between ourselves and the National Trading Standards Estate and Letting Agents team, to report what they would classify as trigger offences, to signpost the complainants to other authorities that can deal with those more serious complaints. So the fact that we can say we can deal with the communication and the service, but there's a whole lot of other stuff there. We can help them and direct them to do that. So it's a bit like, unfortunately, the pandemic and stuff like that. You know, there's no one single kind of cure-all.
Would you ever consider publishing anonymised cases so agents could actually get to read?
We have a number on our website at the moment.
I mean, how many cases are you pumping through a year, roughly?
So it's under 2,000.
Okay,
you would believe, yeah.
But a couple, I bet you, that have been there a while as well. Isn't that something, and you could easily do that in ChatGPT.
Yeah.
You could almost, put the notes in and then give me a 500-word summary. That's as a marketeer, if you don't mind me saying, that's screaming at me.
Yeah, that is screaming. And one of the projects I've got at the moment.
And it would be bloody interesting as well.
Yeah, one of the projects I've got at the moment, we've got two advisory panels. We've got an external industry one that we feed into, and we have a one that represents the members. And I've tasked them to come up with scenarios that we can get proper case studies and guides out, so that you can actually show the letting agent.
You could chuck them out. I mean, you could chuck them out as the boss man. That'd be really interesting stuff. You could almost have you and the TPO, you could both, fortnightly whip one out in Property Industry Eye, pardon the pun. That'd be fantastic. Really fascinating. You get eyeballs.
Yeah.
And you'd get more of the trust. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a session, but I hope you don't mind me saying, but you are a supplier to the industry.
Yeah.
If you think about it in an indirect way, that's screaming at me. I think that's an open goal list for the pair of you.
Yes, and I think one of the things that's on our to-do list is to get more of that out there.
True, right?
And getting out to the media. So we definitely, when we expel members, we're now publishing the reasons for why they're done. And they aren't necessarily not anonymous ones.
No, but I think agents would love. That's where they effed up. Technical term, so they don't F up because stories are so powerful. Anyway, let's move on. Do you think redress schemes should offer clearer guidelines? I know, obviously, we talked about that with the ombudsman, that they have like a code of conduct. Is a code of conduct the same as a guideline?
It has advantages and it has disadvantages. So a code, you live by the code, you die by the code. So if you join an organisation that has a code of practice, whether the rules of the land mean that you can not meet those standards. If you join those, you must be judged by those standards.
Would it be fair to say that, irrespective of which scheme they're in, if agents followed the TPO code of conduct guidelines, they would be obviously passing the TPO rules on the redress, but probably would pass yours as well?
Correct, yes. And that's why we do refer to the TPO code where we can, and to the RICS codes and other codes that are out there. Ultimately,
just take the two and put them into ChatGPT, spin the words around.
Yeah.
No one's watching this. Yeah. There you go. No, don't worry about it.
Ultimately, what we do need in an industry that is crying out for regulation, and this isn't crying out from the legislators, unfortunately, it's crying out for the industry, because exactly, agents say to me, we don't, whether it's good, bad or indifferent, our experience of that, at least we know and we can plan and we can then abide.
Yeah, that's screaming at me. Yeah, as an insider, yet an outsider.
And that needs to be done. And if there could be one single code for the whole of the industry to abide by, then happy days as far as I'm concerned.
Roper's coming in, so we never know.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you're up for Roper, aren't you?
100%.
Bet you are. Right, let's move on. Cost, bureaucracy and burden on agents. Agents pay membership fees regardless of whether they receive complaints. Given that complaints are rarely for good agents, and should there be a pay-per case model introduced instead?
Right, okay, so that's quite a common business model for doing these sort of things. So, for example, the FCA, charge all members.
All of them do, don't they?
We came up, when we first started, we came up with two different models. We had one model which we called the entry level model. So it was a cheaper joining fee that covered our administration and running the scheme. And then if you got a complaint, you then paid a case fee. So no complaints, no case fee. 10 complaints, 10 case fees, right? So for the startup business, or the business that's smallish and never really does get those complaints because they have really good...
I mean, how much do you charge?
Off the top of my head, it's going up slightly shortly because everything is there. But £275, I think, was the entry level.
A year, that's a year?
Yeah, for a year, yeah.
Okay. And that's a one-office operation?
Yeah. Okay. And then complaints on that, I think another £175.
What? So if you get a complaint, you have to pay £175?
Yeah, for that entry model. And then we also have an all-inclusive deal.
And what's that?
That's off the top of my head.
What, we're talking like £400 or £500 a year? Or so?
Less than at the moment.
300 or 400, somewhere around there.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, I'm sure we go to the website on that one.
Yeah. Okay. And
right. Okay. The complaints process is often criticised as bureaucratic, and slow. What improvements are being made to speed up the dispute resolution timescales?
Right. So,
what is an average time?
Average time for us is about 3 months.
That's better than I thought.
Yeah, but it does have. You do have to take into consideration that the the first port of call is the agent.
And they would have had to have gone through a complaints procedure before they get to you.
Correct.
Otherwise, you'll bat them back.
Yes, and so that's one area that personally, you know, and we're talking, you know, as friends as well. I think in the past, maybe, you know, 2 months given to an agent to deal with a complaint was a reasonable period of time. I think that should be condensed back down. I think your complaint process should be no more than 10 days. But at the moment, we give up to a maximum of eight weeks, which I think is too long.
And if it doesn't get resolved, then they can come
And then
to
they come to us. Then immediately we'll push it through. And the early resolution is cutting the time that the cases have been done right down, because we deal with that picking up the telephone. So one of the things that when we first started, and again, it's natural when you start this with technology, we did everything through correspondence and emails and that sort of thing there. So we had a portal, and you've got automatic notifications for that. And I said, no, this isn't the way, because everything's going along the train track until the last destination station. Pick up the phone, have that conversation. Now, if they don't answer the phone after 2 or 3 times, then you have to push it through the process. But once you get talking to people and they're able to initially vent their frustrations and get an explanation, manage those expectations. So you go in there, the tenant will say, you can award up to £25,000. I think I'm entitled to that. Well, we manage that down, because not many cases are worth £25,000.
What is worth 25,000?
For a landlord not getting their rent for a significant period of time, and for a letting agent and a tenant, I think, to be fair, if it's in that sort of compensation level, unless it's a high net worth rental, then there's a bigger problem, and that probably needs to be referred to a higher authority.
Do you think the 25,000 is too high or too low?
I think it's one of those things that because we are an alternative court system, you have to understand that courts have higher powers. So you don't want to grant the same powers to an alternative dispute resolution. And £25,000 is the kind of level that the courts are happy that can be dealt with outside of the legal process.
And if an agent gets clobbered 25 grand or whatever amount, what is the legal redress if they don't pay?
Unfortunately, the complainant would have to take them to court and get a court order against them, unfortunately. But again, we're not a regulated industry. And again, it's another frustrating thing that has been there from the beginning. We've been aware of it. And I'm frustrated why government hasn't recognised why regulation is important, is that literally you can just fold your company up and start again. And there's very little we can do once a company has gone into liquidation to hold them accountable. But what we can do is, if they phoenix, and that is recreate themselves as a new entity, but it's exactly the same, we forensically will pick it up and we'll kick you off the scheme. You know.
Well, surely they'll go to the other one, won't they? Or do you have
we have a memorandum of understanding, and they get a little letter from us saying that, you know, Christopher Watkins Limited has now reconstituted as Watkins Properties Limited.
It's got a great name to it, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're exactly the same company. They're operating from the same office. They've got the same directors. Everything is the same. Don't touch them with a barge pole, and National Trading Standards will be visiting them in due course. So yes, it is an issue that you can evade.
Yeah, but at least it's good that the two organisations are working together to ensure that anyone can slip through the net.
And you also got to remember there's another level of protection that came in after we were appointed, and that was client money protection. And client money protection was something which the industry has been lobbying for a long time. But as part, when we came in, I had a lord in the House of Lords who sat on a working group to build a system for client money protection that was credible and affordable and works for the industry. So that's another layer of protection. And of course, every letting agent and estate agent should have professional indemnity insurance, because things happen, things get messed up. That's what the insurance is there to pay for, protect you as a business, but and also your customers. So there is a layer of stuff there, but regulation will take it that level further.
Let's move on. Someone contacted me about tenants using the redress schemes as a weapon, and they feel that some letting agents feel that tenants abuse the complaint system to pressure agents unfairly. Some are serial complainers. What are your thoughts on that? And would you also consider introducing a three strike rule?
I think it would be very difficult to.
Are there many, or is it just that?
No. So I think if you look overall,
Well, there isn't if you're only going to get 400 quid.
well, some do get more. Some do get more, especially when this is a more serious case. So the average agent is getting about 8% complaint ratio. So of their transactions, only 8 out of 100 people will make some form of complaint to us, and some.
Sorry, 8. There's 1.5 million transactions in the UK for rental each year. Are you telling me 8% of those are complaining to you?
No. Sorry, not 80% complaining to us, but it's about that sort of level. You will have 5 to 8% people will be discontent with your service at any particular time.
Right. Okay.
Sorry, yeah,
that doesn't mean they're complaining to you, though,
yeah,
does it?
if they all complain to us, then you literally would, the system would be falling over. So you do get those complaints. Those that push it forward are relatively few. So we only deal with a couple of thousand, and TPO only deal with a slightly more than that overall. So in the grand scheme of things, there are not huge numbers of complaints going through. We do get ones which they are particularly persistent, okay, but that's where the early resolution does manage that. And if they are no prospect of success, we don't use that phrase anymore, but if they are literally on a hide into nothing, we basically close them down. And they moan and they complain and they write to the government, they write to trading standards, but literally when you see the evidence, it's closed down. So we do have mechanisms. We will close down frivolous and vexatious complaints. They're not as common as people think, because I think it's the interpretation, and somebody that is upset, and if you haven't, even if inadvertently you haven't done the communication and documentation, they get frustrated. Then they appear to be kind of, more kind of just angry than they should be. There are people coming there and they think they want £25,000. We manage that down. And you're right, okay, if they suddenly realise that the maximum they're going to get is 400 quid, suddenly their enthusiasm might disappear.
If you don't mind me saying, there's where those stories kick in, where you could actually do some stories to help tenants.
Yes, 100%. Yes, and we watch this space. We are working at that.
Good, right, let's move on. Some people have said that there's a lack of enforcement on rogue tenants and landlords. Letting agents are held accountable for poor service, but rogue landlords and tenants face little enforcement. Should there be a similar redress scheme for landlords and tenants to balance the scales? And again, we've got the Renters' Rights Bill.
We have the Renters' Rights Bill coming out, and funny enough, at the top of the list of the changes they want to make is to have they call it a register or portal. So every landlord will have to register on this portal, put their property details down, meet minimum standards.
Do you think letting agents could do that for them?
I hope so.
Because there's something here I wrote down that I think there's an opportunity here for the Renters' Right Bills for agents. Let's just spend a couple of minutes on that. Where do you think agents could earn money from the Renters' Right Bill?
Well, look, if you've got a landlord who is hands off, so they might be overseas, they might be living in another part of the country. There was one agent that I dealt with a complaint, 98-year-old landlord. They're not really going to want to be bothered with doing the day-to-day management of that. You can get in place a delegated authority to deal with their complaints. Now, make sure that the only thing, the advice I would say on that is that ultimately the landlord will be responsible. But if agents are taking responsibility and they mess it up, you have a liability to your customer at least, and it could well be, as this evolves, they will the agent could be liable as well in law. So they're going to have to watch that. But otherwise, it's a service like anything else. We'll take that situation on, we'll deal with it, and we'll make sure it goes away for you.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't in the Renters' Right Bill there's some form of complaints procedure that tenants can go for their landlords? Because remembering, half of properties. Or am I got mistaken on that one?
No, that's 100%. That's what the role of this new housing.
So it's not just a glorified spreadsheet. It's there if you've got a problem.
Yeah, there will be. They're going to appoint a similar organisation to ours and the TPO.
But there's more ombudsman schemes than I've had at dinners.
Well, this is one of the arguments we were having. One of the arguments that the proponents of a simplified system said there were too many organisations out there. Now, actually, when we started as in this form, the government, there was already 2 existing schemes, although one was a lot smaller than the other, and we ended up and became a 3rd. And at the time, there was criticism saying, "Well, why do you need a 3rd one there?" And the government, said, "Well, basically, you have one scheme that's affiliated to surveyors and run a scheme on behalf of letting agents associated with RICS, and you've got one that's that deals with those associated with property bar. These are people that have voluntarily joined organisations. We need one that deals with all the other people that haven't done." And as it turned out, we filled that gap. So it made a logical sense. But absolutely, you could probably say, well, what as far as the complaint is concerned, they've got to look and say, well, X or Y. Do I go to X or Y? And the reality is that, it's quite simple. You go to the wrong one, we redirect it to the right one. So it should be fairly simple. One of them dropped down, so there's only 2, but there could be 10 or 15 under the legislation. So we need to simplify it down. But we also have to understand that it's not just about the number of the organisations out there. It's at what stage and how they intervene. So, for example, I will give this as my view. I have written to the government on it and pointed it out, whether they listen or not. The Housing Ombudsman, which is a very effective organisation in recent years, it's changed from where it first was, and deals with big organisations and it deals with maladministration. We deal with little complaints and we deal with service issues.
The Housing Ombudsman, there needs to be an ombudsman for the ombudsman.
Yeah.
They're dealing with councils and big firms, you say?
Yeah, residential landlords, yes. Yeah. So people like Peabody Trust and other that would have to join as a social landlord, as well as Lambeth Council or Grantham town or city, is it?
No. South Kesteven. It's an old.
South Kesteven.
It's old Danish name.
Yeah, lovely.
How would you respond to letting agents about this new scheme is going to look after the landlord in some way, isn't it? Because over 50% of landlords don't use letting agents, so there's going to be redress there. But what about the ones that slip through the net? The ones that won't even register with these things?
That's a very good question. And part of the you will always get people that are going to go into the grey or the black market, go under the radar. What you need to do, and the analogy I use is like nobody has ever seen a black hole, all right? But we know they exist because the reason we know they exist because they're surrounded by bright stars, and in the middle there's nothing. So if we make an environment, a robust environment, where the compliance of everybody else makes that a gap, that's where you direct your intelligence. That's where your intelligence goes in terms of cracking down on these guys, and that's part of the situation that needs to be done. Resourcing the resourcing and the enforcement is also quite important, very important.
And there's some pretty heavy stuff in the Renters' Right Bill.
Correct, yes. So
Rent repayment orders and things
to
like
rent
that.
repayment orders, and actually the powers now that will be granted under this bill, if it becomes an act, and this part becomes an act, a local government official will have more power than the police in terms of finding out information and demanding documentation and everything else. So they've got very draconian powers in theory, but it is about resourcing them.
Okay.
But in my view, it's also intelligence led, and the things like the redress schemes and the portal can help police that and hone it in to those agents that are willfully not complying.
Would you support a creation of a tenant redress scheme where basically bad tenants can get reported?
In principle, I would. Now there are issues with that, with data protection and how you would register those people, because it's unless they have got a criminal conviction, then it's your word against others. What I would, however, want to see introduced is more alternative redress available to landlords and to letting agents, especially for things when we know that the new legislation is going to mean an increase in the number of cases going to court. We know the courts will struggle to deal with that, and we need to, alternative dispute resolution could really help a landlord or a letting agent at an earlier stage than going to the court to mitigate any losses that they might have. But whether there will ever be a kind of a blacklist of tenants, I think that's very unlikely. I think
Probably a step too far, especially with the colour of the government, which side of the benches they come from. Right, let's talk about the future of all redress and regulation. Given the increasing regulation in the private rented sector, do you believe that the redress system needs reform?
I think it needs tweaking. I think at the moment we need to look at how we engage as early as possible with the letting agents, and when the landlords come in and have to join the redress as early as possible, so that they can take control of their own destiny and their own complaints. So more support that way. And I also think that that we could use technology to more triage and to signpost people through the system. When you go to your lovely hospital, you don't want to just kind of wander in and just kind of say, I'm not entirely sure what's wrong with me. I'm just going to find the department myself. You are triaged, you are directed to the right and appropriate.
And if there's some Whitehall Mandarin watching this, what extra thing would you ask them for both your scheme and the TPO that you haven't got at the moment?
It would be for it to be supplemented by regulation, so that the next step from us would be referred to a regulator with teeth, who can not just enforce on particular issues, which that needs to be bolstered, but would actually look and say, actually, you're not a fit and proper person long term to be in this industry, either to rent properties as a landlord or a letting agent, and to prohibit them from operating in the market and causing further detriment. So yes, we all make mistakes, and if those mistakes are serious enough, you get a slap on the wrist from us, or you get a big fine from the government, but from the local authority, but you reform. But if you are genuinely not fit to do the job you're doing, the regulators should have the power of removing you from the industry.
Sean, thank you for your time today. The vast majority of people watching this video are going to be agents. What would your final words to them be?
My final words would be, embrace this system. Make complaints your friend. Very little data, is as effective as complaints data, because complaints data shows where your systems are weak and where your systems are strong. So if you embrace complaints and use, root cause analysis, I think the word is, and analyze those complaints, embrace them, then you will learn a lot about your business. Also, if you deal with a complaint in a professional and good way, not only do you deal and make the detriment to you less, you actually can sell your business better. Oh, something went really wrong with with that transaction, with that situation, but they stepped up, they went over and above, they made it right. They're a good lot. We forgive them for them making mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but the way they handled it is is important. When you come to us, it should be something's gone wrong with your system, but we're also there to try and say, well, actually, there is a final chance to do that. You don't really want me getting hold of your complaint and making the decision, because that means that the system's probably failed because we haven't been able to find a way forward, yourselves and the system. So we need to understand that the more information, the more you communicate with us, the more you help us, the more we can help you.
Thank you for your time today, Sean. But more importantly, thank you for watching the video. If you've got any questions, please do put them on the YouTube channel in the comment section, or if this is just a little clipette that you've seen in the video, put that on the social media channel as well. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you very much, Chris.